When sweet Gaga couldn't get up, the vet performed an ultrasound on the gorilla, and what he saw left him in shock. The once playful and entertaining gorilla, dubbed Sweet Gaga by visitors, couldn't get up for several days. The concerned visitor called the zookeeper's attention. The gorilla had been said to be pregnant for quite some time now, but she hadn't given birth yet. Having looked up how long a gorilla was supposed to be pregnant, this visitor suspected something was wrong. Even from where he stood, he could tell the animal was distressed and greatly inconvenienced by her large belly. When the zookeepers finally paid attention to him, they quickly brushed off his concerns. They said there was absolutely nothing wrong with the animal and told the visitor to go about his day. Sweet Gaga had always been the center of attraction and entertainment for visitors since she'd been brought to the privatized zoo on the outskirts of Louisiana, and that wasn't the first time many concerned visitors pointed out Gaga's condition. However, nothing changed. The zookeepers were adamant about keeping things as they were. Gaga is pregnant and just feeling a little moody. She's fine, they would say, except the gorilla was not fine. She needed help, and fast. As luck would have it, it wasn't until one day when a popular social media star, Charlie, visited the zoo that help finally came for Gaga. A follower of his had tipped him off about the inhumane conditions in the zoo, especially about the allegedly pregnant gorilla who remained pregnant for far longer than she should have and looked terribly ill. Charlie couldn't believe the tip at first, but when he saw the animal for himself and the zookeeper's dismissiveness about his concerns, he knew he had to do something. There was a lot of engagement and comments from several people who had been to the zoo recently as well. They too had noticed the many disturbing things going on there, but no one had been able to change anything. They expressed how depressed, sick, and bloated the animals, not just Gaga, looked. One of the commenters replied he had brought this to the attention of the zookeepers, who brushed it aside as just a minor mood change of the gorilla. The following day, the zoo had a lot of visitors who came to see the gorilla, and some even took pictures of her. When these pictures were posted on the internet, concerns grew as many people mentioned the gorilla's pregnancy did not look like a normal pregnancy. Online spectators began to push for the zoo to run a checkup on the animal. On average, pregnancy lasts for about 8.5 months among gorillas. The poor thing had been saddled with a large protruding belly for almost 10 months. The more the news spread, the more attention it caught. Many vets and specialists began to voice their doubts about the animal being pregnant to begin with. Several people online also recounted their experiences at the zoo, especially about the caretakers' and owners' negligence and nonchalant attitude toward the health of their animals. This was a main issue at the zoo brought up by people who noticed the gorilla's unusual behavior and condition. The outrage finally led to the visitors speaking out against the private zoo and seeking the attention of higher authorities. For days following the reports, there was no response or action taken by the zoo owners. Mark, an experienced vet, took it upon himself to go check on the animal and diagnose what could be wrong with it. When Mark got down to the zoo the following day to examine the gorilla that had become so famous, he was denied access alongside several other visitors who came that day. When word got out, the police were notified and they went to check on the animal. When they got to the zoo, its gate was occupied by protesters demanding justice for the gorilla. There was so much fuss the police had to force the zoo owners to close down the zoo until the public's concerns were addressed. Mark went to the zoo and requested he be permitted to see and care for the gorilla, but the staff insisted all was well with Gaga. Mark made a quick bargain with the zookeepers. He would examine the animal and help with the protest if all was truly well with it. They agreed and let him in. When he got inside, he immediately went to Gaga's enclosure. When he got there, his heart sank right into his stomach at the sight of the gorilla. The poor thing lay at the edge of her wide enclosure, looking pale, seemingly weak, and completely unable to move. She was surrounded by her own waste, rotting bananas, and treats likely thrown at her by visitors. One of the zoo attendants said she hadn't eaten anything they'd given her for a long time. She just lay there, watching quietly and dozing off now and then. Sure enough, Gaga looked pregnant at first glance. A belly that big was hard to miss, but this didn't look like a normal pregnancy to Mark either. Unaware that the younger attendant had divulged that the gorilla hadn't been eating, the manager, who joined the pair, began to lie to the doctor, clearly trying to distract from the horrible sight in front of them. She claimed that the gorilla was just having a difficult pregnancy and their resident vet was on top of it. She added that Gaga had simply been overeating, which was why she was so lethargic and tired all the time. Mark knew all of this was a lie. Judging from the state of Gaga's enclosure, there was probably no vet taking care of her and no overeating going on either. Something sinister was going on, and he wanted to uncover it. Mark insisted he perform an ultrasound on the gorilla to provide a diagnosis and possible treatment. He was told to come back the next day, as his work would disturb the zoo's chief veterinarian. Mark felt like he had no choice but to agree. Besides, he wanted to be as accommodating as possible so as not to tip them off. He could hardly get any sleep that night and came back to the zoo very early the following day with his ultrasound machine and equipment packed. When he got to the zoo, he was shocked by what he found. Many enclosures that were filled with animals the day before were now empty. A lot of the zoo's inhabitants seemed to have vanished into thin air. The zoo was partly empty as they had secretly relocated some of the animals away to an unknown location. There was no doubt in Mark's mind anymore. He knew that they were up to no good. He was surprised to see they hadn't moved Gaga yet, but he suspected it was because they couldn't in a hurry and fear of what would happen to her and the other animals they had hidden. Mark shared an update online. Not long after, reporters started gradually trickling into the zoo to see the zoo and report what was happening live. The zoo's veterinarian told Mark there was no need to trouble the gorilla. Gaga was fine, they insisted. When Mark stood his ground and started threatening the man, the vet finally admitted that something was wrong with the animal, but it was far too much trouble and effort. He suggested that they just put the animal out of its misery and get another one. Mark was horrified and outraged. How could a trained veterinarian say such a thing about an animal? Mark was now more determined than ever to do his examination on the gorilla, unaware of the horrible things he would discover soon. At this time, more reporters and supporters were already gathering at the entrance of the zoo, and some were protesting and trying to rattle the security guard. It was getting out of hand, and nothing was being done about the situation. It was as if the zoo owners were determined to have the animal dead rather than save its life. After another hour of going back and forth with the zoo caregivers, the noise got wilder outside the building. Mark made a decision and took a bold step outside the zoo to address the protesters. He explained to them the severity of the condition sweet Gaga could be in at the moment. He mentioned he had been at the zoo since the early hours of the day requesting permission to examine the animal, but he'd been denied that. He said he was willing to help for free. He just wanted to see that the animal they all cared about was well and nursed back to health. This caused an uproar among the crowd, and the commotion eventually forced the police to come and break up the chaos. On hearing what caused the uproar, they asked that the zoo owners step aside and let the good veterinarian do his job. It appeared they too were aware of the situation and knew it was important to uncover whatever they were hiding at this facility. The zoo had no choice but to let Mark through. When Mark was finally granted access to the enclosure with the animal, he got into his full gear and got to work. Mark very cautiously entered the animal enclosure, unsure of what to expect. He slowly moved towards the animal, in order to not alarm her or the younger ones around her, but as if they knew he was there to help their friend, they all moved to another part of the enclosure. Mark walked up to sweet Gaga, But the animal remained unmoving and lethargic. It just lay there in surrender with a vacant stare, as if completely depressed. This behavior did not go unnoticed by Mark, who got very concerned. He moved closer still to the animal and slowly touched her leg, but she didn't move or react. She looked to have been lying in the same position for several days now. He hoped he wasn't too late to help her. Setting his equipment down, Mark began to examine sweet Gaga. He was surprised to see that the area around her private parts was quite clean for an animal that hadn't moved around for days. Sweet Gaga was dehydrated, pale, and losing weight with a protruding belly. The gorilla's breath slowed and her eyes dropped. Her condition seemed to worsen. Mark knew he had to act fast to save Gaga's life. He set up his portable ultrasound machine and examined the gorilla's belly. As he probed around, his eyes focused on the machine screen. He suddenly stopped and froze. He moved his hand probe deeper. His eyes focused on the screen. His eyes widened in shock, and he screamed in horror. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. It wasn't an overdue pregnancy like they had all thought or pretended. In fact, it wasn't a pregnancy at all. He looked closer at the screen as though to see deeper into the animal's belly. Whatever he saw had him pulling on his gloves and grabbing his scalpel and syringe. He injected the almost unconscious animal with anesthesia to numb the pain and ensure both their safety. Very quickly, he made a clean cut in her stomach. By this time, several of the protesters were standing outside the enclosure, quietly watching and making videos of the vet working on the unconscious animal. Some could be seen praying and getting teary-eyed as they didn't know what would be the outcome. They were afraid that this could be the end of the playful and entertaining sweet Gaga. Mark worked swiftly for 40 more minutes, clearing out the stomach of the gorilla. Gaga was not pregnant. Her stomach contained huge balls of undigested food, feces, and waste, meaning there had to be a blockage somewhere. He had to relieve the pressure temporarily, but they would need to get the animal to a proper operating room to save her life. He immediately called for help, and the people rallied around for an ambulance. Soon they arrived to the rescue, and the gorilla was carefully transported to Mark's vet clinic, where they would be able to properly intervene. Everything happened in a blur as they rushed to scrub in and get her to the operating table. The next step was to remove whatever was causing the blockage in the animal's stomach and bowels. As sweat was pouring down their spines, they finally found the origin of the problem. Right there, they saw a large piece of plastic wrapper blocking Gaga's intestines from passing undigested food and feces to her bowels for excretion. Mark couldn't fathom how the gorilla had managed to swallow the piece of plastic. It was a glaring example of neglect on the part of the zoo caregivers. They had most likely not completely removed the wrapping from the food before giving it to the animals, and sweet Gaga just happened to be the unfortunate one to swallow it. Mark was able to remove the blockage and clean up the gorilla. The surgical team worked tirelessly to patch up Gaga and get her stable, and finally they did. Mark was baffled by the zookeeper's carelessness. He just couldn't understand how they let things get to this point. It was frustrating to see their lack of concern for the gorilla's health. It felt like they weren't even bothered if she pulled through. Their attitude was really disappointing. The story quickly spread as reporters flocked to Mark's clinic for interviews. The public was eager for updates on sweet Gaga's condition. While Mark was pleased to share the good news, he also made a point to address the neglect sweet Gaga had endured. They had found the problem and had successfully saved Gaga, but the zoo owners would have to face the law. Over the next 3 weeks, Mark dedicated himself to nursing Gaga back to health. She made a remarkable recovery and was soon thriving, looking healthier than ever. In the meantime, Mark's acts of kindness had turned him into a national sensation, with many considering him a celebrity for his exceptional care of the animal. His vet clinic became a go-to destination for pet owners. His expertise was sought after not only for household pets, but also for farm animals. He wrote a petition against the private zoo owners, backed by numerous people on the internet, and they were able to see to it that the owners were prosecuted and lost their license. The remaining animals were transported to a different location where they could receive proper care, including sweet Gaga. The world would forever be grateful to good vets like Mark for saving sweet Gaga's life. What are your best and worst experiences in a zoo? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your story and feedback. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.